Hey, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ashley Weinheimer. I'm a customer success librarian for McGraw-Hill's AccessEngineering platform, which is the sponsor for today's panel discussion on top trends in infrastructure engineering. Just a quick word on McGraw-Hill on my slides here. AccessEngineering is McGraw-Hill's engineering reference platform, which contains well-known reference titles, handbooks, and upper-level textbooks, as well as instructional videos, spreadsheet calculators, interactive graphs, and additional tools to support practicing engineers. If you would like more information on AccessEngineering, please contact customer success at the email listed on the screen. Before I introduce our panelists, I have just a few quick housekeeping things to cover. The panel is being recorded, so everyone who registered will receive a link to view that recording. All of your attendee lines are muted, but you do have the option to use chat or Q&A to communicate with me in the panel. You should see those options at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A box for any official questions that you'd like our panelists to consider in the discussion today, and then feel free to use the chat option to add any other comments on the topics that you'd like to share. Some of my McGraw-Hill colleagues and I will be monitoring those, so please enter your questions and comments throughout the discussion. We definitely want to hear from you and for this to be as interactive as possible. And now let me introduce our guest panelists. So Dave Adams, SE, is a principal associate with BWE and an adjunct professor at the University of California, San Diego. He is a member of the California Building Standards Commission Structural Design and Lateral Forces Code Advisory Committee and is the author of the Structural Engineering SE All-in-One Exam Guide, the Structural Engineer Professional Training Manual, and Ethics in Civil and Structural Engineering. Dave teaches seminars for the American Society of Civil Engineers and regularly designs and details structures of various materials and collaborates with other engineers and draftspersons. Dave also investigates structural failings or damage for a variety of building types and has written comprehensive reports to summarize findings and retrofit recommendations. Dr. Mustafa Mahamid is currently an associate research fellow at Technion Israel Institute of Technology and a research associate professor at University of Illinois at Chicago. He is also a structural engineering consultant for multiple structural engineering firms and has worked as a structural engineer at GRAEF and SOM in Chicago. Mustafa's designs include a wide variety of projects, including healthcare, commercial, residential, industrial, and high-rise buildings located in the US, Europe, Middle East, and China. And he has solid experience in various building materials, including concrete, steel, wood, and masonry. And lastly, Cliff Schexnayder served in the US Army Corps of Engineers beginning in 1967, with his last assignment as Executive Director, Directorate of Military Programs, in the Office of the Chief of Engineers. After retiring from that post, he entered academia and has taught construction engineering at the Del E. Webb School of Construction, Arizona State University from 1994 to 2003, and as a visiting professor at Virginia Tech, the U.S. Air Force Academy, the Universidad de Piero and Ricardo Palma Universidad in Peru, and the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. In the private sector, Cliff has served as a chief engineer and officer of the corporation of Nello L. Tier Company in Durham, North Carolina. In 2012, he was honored by the American Society of Civil Engineers with the Outstanding Projects and Leaders Award. He is a co-author of 2 textbooks, Construction Planning, Equipment and Methods, and Construction Management Fundamentals. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for being with us today and sharing your expertise on the top trends in infrastructure engineering. So our expert panelists also recently contributed to an article on Construction Dive that was also sponsored by McGraw-Hill, and that article is linked on my slide here, and we'll share that in the chat as well. I also have on this slide the 3 top trends from that article that we'll be discussing today. So we're going to start off with connected and experiential technology. So the first question for our panel is, how has the industrial Internet of Things been incorporated in infrastructure engineering, and specifically the use of drones, which I know Dave talked about in the article. So we can start with Dave and then the others can chime in.
That sounds good. Thank you, Ashley. Just a real quick correction before I go on. I didn't catch this in my bio intro, but it mentioned that I was still working with the code advisory panel for the Building Seismic Safety Council. I finished that work a while back and got busy doing other things and just haven't gotten back into that panel or that advisory committee again. But one of these days I'm going to join them back up again, because it was a good. I really enjoyed the colleagues that I got a chance to work with and the different work that we were doing for that. So just wanted to make a quick correction there. So going back to the use of drones, a few different things. Our company does civil engineering, structural engineering, and land surveying, and all three of those groups have been able to use drones for a variety of different things. One of the things that our structural department has used drones for was for an up close and personal survey of the exterior of buildings. For instance, if we're trying to examine cracks or we're trying to examine different parts that you can't quite see from the ground, rather than having to get into any special climbing gear or whatnot, you can use drones to fly around the building, and you can go really close to different parts of the building that you want to see up close and personal. And it's been a real benefit to be able to use drone technology for closely examining buildings and the things that we might want to look at. For the civil department, they've been able to use drones for being able to identify to be able to get a more detailed topographic survey. Of course, this would be part of the survey team's duties as well, to get a very detailed survey of a site and to be able to present that information. I'm sorry?
Ashley, let me share the screen, please.
Oh, sure. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. And sorry, Dave, go ahead.
So there's your drone, Dave.
Thanks, Cliff. Yeah, so we've been, so the survey and civil departments have been able to use the drones to get a very detailed topographic survey of a site to get a really nice set of cut and fill type of projections to be able to present the information to architects and developers, to be able to even lay certain things on there through CAD technology to get a picture of what's going on and how buildings or other structures will be placed with respect to other existing landmarks. And the survey crew has used drone technology for, it's something that's relatively new in the industry, but they've been using it for a while and they've gotten very used to doing that. Another thing that drones have been able to accomplish for construction managers is just to be able to monitor the progress of construction as the project moves forward, and they're able to get an idea as to schedule. Are things moving according to schedule? Do they need to speed up? What are some of the things that they might need to do in order to be able to get back onto schedule? And even just from a liability standpoint, just being able to document progress. We are keeping pace. We are current with the schedule that we have, or as I said before, possibly even being able to see areas that might need improvement. So drones have really benefited the industry in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And Cliff, I know you had some images, which I don't think are being shared. So if you want to go ahead and try and share those again.
Here we go. I'm sorry.
There it goes.
There it is. Okay, that's a site. They fly it. They have a program flight every week. See just what you were talking about, Dave, progress on it. This is, once they learn how to do it, this is easy and it gives you a lot of information quickly. That's really, this is a thing that's been accepted. Some of these other things, it's hard to change how we've done things, even just going to BIM from paper takes a generation to change the mindset in an office. So we've got lots of opportunities out there. We need to try to do those things.
And Mustafa, anything to add on that topic?
Yes, we, in addition to what Dave and Cliff said, in the oil and gas industry, in some of the consulting that I do, we have been using scanners that actually scan, entire structure, and, give us, a lot of information that actually it used, several engineers for several days, to get. And of course, those things, of course, will give us a lot more detailed information about the structure than just, whatever is possible to see from just a visual inspection. So this, I have been involved in multiple projects in the last 2 to 3 years, and I found that extremely helpful in seeing what the existing structure is, and the amount of information that we can get from that. There have been also in relation to drones as well. We know we are getting into another industry which we have already, which is the wind turbines. So wind turbines are relatively new, but over a short period of time, those will require regular inspection, and drones will be an option for those. But now the thought is about using scanners for those, which hasn't been developed fully yet, but they're talking about it in the industry. And as we know, wind turbines are relatively high and difficult to reach. So definitely we would need these types of technologies to inspect those.
Yeah, we had to build special cranes to reach up there and put those turbines, put those wings on that thing.
Exactly. If we don't come up with the technology, that's right. Yep.
So I know we've talked a lot about sort of benefits of this technology, but are there any concerns that arise, or any other obstacles to implementing this technology?
In this area of artificial intelligence, and your telephone's got on it today, it knows who you're calling, where you're doing all that things. But that is based on historical facts. Our AI programs historical facts. Who would have predicted the COVID? Who would have predicted the war that's going on in Europe? It changes the whole construction industry structure in this country. If I was bidding a big project, I wouldn't have thought about that war affecting the fuel supplies for my equipment or anything. They had the hurricane down in Florida the other day, and the firemen didn't understand about those batteries, those electric cars, and they're smoking because they got wet, and the firemen are pouring more water on them. We're moving very fast, and we need to think more strategically of what we're doing, how we change things. Where are we going to generate the power for those batteries so we can charge them up? If you saw in the news, California is now going to let that nuclear power plant run a little bit longer because they need it. That's a big portion. You're going to see the same thing on the East Coast. They've got a bunch of projects, nuclear plants that will go down and take a lot of the power. You got to have the power. So if you do the electric car, good, but you got to have the generating power to charge those batteries. We got to think in more strategically. What's the effect if we take this answer? And we tend not to do that. And we need to slow down a little bit in our thinking if we're going to do this. There's things happening very rapidly. Opportunities happen very rapidly. But think about it. Think the impact downstream.
I think one of the things with technology that we find is that some technologies that you use take training. In fact, most technologies take training to be able to use. And a lot of times it takes continued use. Otherwise, you kind of forget what you've learned during your training. So if you only use a drone, or you only use this technology or that computer program or whatever it is, if you only use it every now and then, you kind of forget how to use it, and you have to relearn that. And so there's a bit of a struggle there in trying to figure out how to accommodate that without having to rely on a specific team that's all that team does is utilize that technology. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's an easy hurdle to overcome. I think that'll always be with us, but just learning how to do new technologies and being able to continue in that technology, regardless of whether you use it day in and day out or not, I think that's always going to be a challenge.
And if I may add I think one of the challenges that the departments of transportation across the country expressed is the use of data collected from bridge inspection through sensors. So DOTs support academics with research to come up with ways to inspect bridges remotely through different methods of non-destructive evaluation. Now the one of the challenges is how can we use all that data that is collected, okay, to somebody who's sitting in front of an engineer, or not somebody, an engineer who's sitting in front of a screen and analyzing this data and coming up with the right conclusions about what's happening. So this is a challenge which actually requires the data science component now to work with the civil engineers, to try to come up with an easy way for the civil engineers to understand what to do with this, okay, and how to, discover if there's a problem in a bridge, for example, if there's a crack, or there's a local failure, if there's anything. So this has to be done through collaboration with computer science and data scientists to overcome this problem. So technology is great, but now we need to know, as Dave said, how to use it and how to use the results that are obtained, from technology.
Yeah, very, very good points. Thank you for that. So I do want to move on to the next topic now, the next trend, which was the increased consideration of sustainable design. So first question there is, how are engineers adapting to the challenges of climate change and unprecedented weather events and infrastructure? So Cliff, you kind of talked about the hurricane that happened recently. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll not the hurricane, but this sustainability. And we don't think about the downstream. We've got a problem right now in getting cement, to get the cement, the part, you add to the rocks and the water to make concrete, because we're trying to produce it in a more sustainable manner. Well, the new product reacts differently with the water and the aggregates and things like that. So I'm hearing engineers in Ohio, I'm hearing engineers in Texas, and all this, they had a mixed design. They can't get any cement except for the newer quality. You got to go through the mixed design again. You've got to think about the downstream effects when you change something. Right? And it's the same thing with the cars. I think the downstream effect that we haven't addressed yet is, how do we produce the electricity that we need for these cars? One of the problems with the hurricane was older people. How do we get them out of those situations? We have to have vehicles that can do that, and those electric cars with those batteries cannot do that. We ran into that with other hurricanes, and the hurricanes from the East Coast down to where I am down here in South Louisiana. We had 4 2 years ago. We only had 1 last year, this year, thank goodness. But they hit. You go to California, Dave out there, he's got those seismic things going on. They take your power system out. How do you charge the vehicles then? We've got to think about how this whole thing works together. And we don't do a good job of that. We don't slow down and turn this computer on, this one right here. We got to do that.
Yeah, one of the things.
Data.
Sorry, like Clifford said, one of the things that goes along with sustainability is another term called resilience. especially when there's a major event that causes certain things to get knocked out. And resilience basically is a measure of how quickly a community or a region can rebound after the effects of a major catastrophe or environmental effect. And Cliff's exactly right. And I think that's what we understand from the teachings on sustainability too, is it's all based on a plan. It's based on a set of goals. What is it that we hope for? Well, we want to be able to bring our infrastructure, our water supply, our trash collection. We want to bring everything back up to get people into buildings again. We want to bring that back as quickly as possible. There are a lot of things that we need to have in place to be able to do that. We need to have a functioning economy, need to make sure that that doesn't get devastated through those events. And then we also need to make sure we have power, as Cliff had mentioned as well. We need to make sure that we have people that are working on those things and bringing all of those things back up to speed. So that sustainability and resilience are two terms that really do go together.
Yeah, and if I may add also, from a design standpoint, how we look at this, we due to experiencing some of the disasters that occurred during the last 2 decades, there have been some developments in 2 things. I mean, there are several things, but mainly that I would think the 2 things that I want to talk about is basically the loads that we design the structures for, and also the materials that we use in structures. So these 2 areas have been affected. So the loads, have been changing, in the coasts, as we see, due to, of course, the climate change, and due to, of course, the increase in the changes in the forces on the structures that are coming from nature. So so if we look at the loading standards from 2000 until now, we see how the loads are changing. Due to the earthquake in Japan in 2010, on the tsunami that occurred in Japan, now we have what's called tsunami loads in the loading design standards, ASCE7. The other thing that has been changing is also the material, so the strength. So there have been a lot of research and also use of high strength materials in structures to, of course, provide higher strength to the structure and also extend the life of the structure. And that's an important part, extending the life of structure. That's
I think that is a very important point.
Yeah, exactly.
We can do a better job there.
Yep.
Much better job than we're doing right now.
And bridges. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is now actually, especially to infrastructure, this has been one of the main focuses. I have talked to, some of the principals in bridge engineering companies, during the last, couple of years while working on some, research proposals. This is one of the main things that they're talking about. So material that will extend the life of bridges. And there's also similar work that has been done on the transportation side, like transportation engineers and also, researchers in transportation that are, that they focus on like roads and pavement and asphalt and things like that. So they are doing research, in parallel, that also will affect, the roads, and of course the bridges that are part of the roads will affect us, structural engineers. So these are 2 important things. And into the material, research that is being conducted, and actually some of the results of that research that actually have been used, and whether it's in concrete or in steel, but there's also the smart material use in civil engineering application that is also coming and affecting and will affect, the structures in the future. and also will affect the resiliency, sustainability, and the resiliency of the structures.
You talked about Florida had a hurricane, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20, and they started upgrading their electrical system, the system, the structures. Most places in Florida had power within 3 days. When we had either last year down here, parts of South Louisiana didn't have power for 3 months. If we do it right the first time, if we think about that sustainability, whether it's a bridge, a road, everything is better. And roads and bridges, we don't have to redo it. We don't have to use all that energy, that fuel for those vehicles, that material. It ties together. Let's think about the total picture. And that's, I believe, what you were saying there. You know, this is the Mao earthquake in Chile. Now, that we have lots of history from earthquakes in California. Lots of problems that we saw was not just didn't put the confinement on the column steel. And so things came down. What was the problems in California on bridges years ago? And they said, we need more confinement steel. Well, let's do it. Let's learn. Let's take that knowledge and get it out there. Explain that to our students. Explain that to our engineers. Very important. And we will be more sustainable.
Yeah, so anything else to add on that topic? It sounds like a lot of, the upfront work of putting the thought and the investment into making the sustainable and resilient design really helps in the long run. Are there any sort of obstacles there? Obviously, budgeting would be a concern because I'm assuming a lot of these things are probably more costly, even the technology we were talking about earlier with drones and that sort of thing. So are there any other obstacles or concerns to implementing more sustainable and resilient design?
We're
I think
talking.
it's, I mean, a lot of it is really education and making sure that the public understands the benefits of not only servicing the needs of the present generation, but also securing the needs of future generations. And quite often an owner's not going to implement something if they don't have to. If it costs them extra money, they're going to say, do I have to do this? No, well, then I don't want to do it. And so there's not necessarily a kind of a future outlook or review with building codes. As Cliff mentioned, we continue to learn things after we have a major event, and so the code is updated every 3 years, and so it incorporates new findings from recent events, new findings from testing, and other types of things that have been brought forward and to the engineer's attention. So that kind of forces the issue. It forces an engineer to keep current with the latest things that we've learned from major disasters or testing or whatever. But we don't have the same thing necessarily with addressing climate change and sustainability and those types of things. We do have environmental codes and regulations. We do have a lot of regulations. I don't mean to say we don't, but currently some of the codes that we use to incorporate sustainable options and other things with our structures, they're kind of a blending of mandatory requirements and also voluntary requirements. And I don't think we'll ever move away from that, and I kind of don't think we should, but perhaps the balance needs to be a little bit better. I don't think it's good to force somebody to do something unless there's a significant benefit to that. I think with the sustainability, there are so many different options and so many different pathways that people can take, engineers, architects, developers, landowners, the public, politicians. There's so many different pathways that we can take, and I think we just need to have a really robust environment of dialogue. We need to be able to talk with one another without shouting at each other, and we need to be able to agree on certain things that we've had sufficient amount of discussion about, and as a team of whoever it is that's part of that team, just having that vision and deciding what that vision is and moving forward together in an environment of respect and honesty and clear communication, respecting the opinions of everybody, respecting all persons to be part of that solution. And I think that's a big part, is just that environment of inclusivity and just being able to understand perspectives from everyone and just being able to move forward in that manner.
I'm seeing a chat question here. And sometimes it's hard to change the culture, but I'll just say BIM. We're going to design it. We can turn the building around. We can look at it from different perspectives. You can see the light on it, how the sun shines on it. Also, if we give the builder or the building team the metadata for those calculations, we also have a better opportunity to explain to an owner, if we do this, we're going to spend this money up front, but we're going to cut down on your utility bill, or you can remodel it, or you can put a new roof on it easier to match the changing conditions. When we go from that paper drawing where people have to understand or how to visualize something that's drawn looking down, looking sideways, I can take the actual building and show you the building, the construction process, and I can show you the effect of where you're going to be. You're up north somewhere and they got those cold winters. You're up in North Dakota, a lot different what I need to do to that building than you're down here in Houston, Texas, or South Louisiana, or Florida. Difference in just the air-conditioned ductwork and how that humidity in the air can cause viruses to form in your ductwork. We have the opportunity, but very few transportation agencies issue documents in the BIM or the electronic format. There's a few. New York has done a little bit, but we haven't used, or we haven't taken advantage of an opportunity, I don't believe. And it usually takes a generation to change the mindset within any organization. We need to work hard at that.
Thanks. So I do see some questions coming in, but let's get to our last topic and then we'll go back to the audience questions. So just the last trend that we were going to talk about today is addressing social inequalities with human-centered projects. So I feel like we've touched on this maybe a little bit about taking considerations earlier in projects, but from that sort of human-centered aspect, does anybody have any thoughts on how we can maybe take those considerations into account sooner in infrastructure projects?
I think we're becoming more aware of trying to do that. And that's another way you can do it with BIM. You can show it where it is, but you have to think about communities. You have to understand the community, the social part. And we're not good at that yet. I see things about building roads and you can do this and you can do that. Well, I live in the country. It is sugarcane harvest season right now. Those roads have tractors, big tractors, and trucks hauling that cane to the mill. Very different. You've got to understand the social content of where you're building the structure or where you're building the road or the bridge or anything else. We don't do a good job of it. We have not done a good job of that. But if we can bring in and show what we're trying to do, we can get comments and probably do a much better job using that, what I'm going to just call it BIM technology, not name any particular thing. Stuff?
Yeah, I would agree, on this. I think especially with when we have a disaster, that does not, distinguish between a country area, and, a city center. So, of course, the effect would be a lot more, where the people are more populated, but that does not protect the people who live in the countryside. So, yeah, I think we still need a lot of work, on that, because this has not been addressed, properly. I mean, we can see, within the same city, within, the same area, we can see the inequality, from, one area to another. Um, and because I think because of the policies that we always have, which is basically, the human-centered areas, the businesses, the shopping areas, those are served better than, residential, areas, and even the residential areas are, not equally, served. So I think we are really far, from, having, equality, in those, and a lot of work should be done, on that. Especially
Yeah.
if we connect this to the previous topic, that talked about, which is about sustainability and resiliency. So they are interconnected.
Yeah, it's tough because there are a lot of different people making those types of decisions. A lot of people,
Right.
politicians, small businesses, residents. There's a lot of people that are involved in making those decisions, and oftentimes the decisions are chosen to kind of stack up on the top end first. We need to try to get people to need to make sure that people can get to businesses where they can spend money, invest in the local economy, and those are very important things. But I think what possibly happens is that by the time they spend a lot of money getting facilities and infrastructure around businesses upgraded, they don't have enough money to really service underserved communities, and they just kind of keep getting forgotten when the budget gets exhausted, or whatever happens. And so I think it's a combination of just being aware that there are needs across the board, and spending money wisely. That's going to be a thing that we have to do, and it's always going to be a struggle, because again, there are so many different people trying to work through how to budget and how to spend the money on different projects. But there should be more of a balanced need, a more of a balanced understanding or recognition of not only the big communities but the small communities, and understanding that everyone participates in the environment, participates in the economy of a particular region. Everybody needs to be able to get to and from work, get to and from school. They need that infrastructure to be able to get around. And if we can, as best as we can, to try to equally address all regions, not just paying attention to one particular region, which again, I understand that, and that's important. You have to have the business centers active so that your economy can grow, but at the same time, we can't forget these other areas. And I think sometimes that might deal with, all of a sudden we've run out of money, and so now we don't have enough money to service these underserved areas. And it's just a continual cycle that just keeps going and going and going. And I think maybe one of the answers, probably with a lot of things, is just we really have to spend our money smarter.
Right. Ashley, can I go to one of these chat questions about practical ways?
Yeah. So let's start with that one from the chat. What are some practical ways that virtual reality and augmented reality solutions can be used to enhance project workflows and communications between teams?
I like that last part there, teams, building those teams. With friends, you can do the impossible. If you get in an argument about everything, it doesn't work. I'll give you an example. We talked about the BIM. You can show the progress of the work. You can show where you want to be this week or next week. And I was on a job a month or so ago, and one day a week in the evenings, the superintendents, the foremen come in, the young engineers are there, and they go through, and the project manager doesn't tell them what they want to do next week. He lets those people, what are we going to do? And he asks them with that picture up there, what are we going to do next week? and somebody that's doing the earthwork says this and this and this, and then the concrete person says this, this, and this, and they're having their conversation together. They're not being directed because you got that picture there to help you make those, and they understand how they impact the other players in the game, the other parts of the team. It really enhances that workflow. We can do this if we work together, work as a team. That's a key word down there.
Yeah, so Mustafa or Dave, any thoughts on that particular question about technology enhancing project workflows and communications?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we talked about and that we learned through COVID is the ability for employees to work from home, and that capability of remote work is very real, and it's expanding. And people that are looking, especially younger folks that are looking for their first jobs or moving on to a new job, that's a really big request that they bring to the table, is the ability to work between a physical office and also being able to work from home. And there are some very real needs for that. And I think businesses, both private and public agencies, we're still learning how to deal with all of this in a way that we can kind of monitor productivity and just being able to use technology effectively and being able to remotely access our computers and our programs. Our office has been able to do it very successfully. We've got some tools that are working very well for us, it's always just amazes me that simple things that I'm able to access my computer remotely and use all the same programs and access the server and those types of things. So I think I think things have been set up to kind of help that to happen, to where people can take care of things that they need to take care of. And I think this is something that can also be helpful in being able to focus on a better work-life balance. That's also something that is, I don't think COVID taught us that that's an important thing. I think we've always known that's an important thing, but I think COVID kind of forced us to develop and use and recognize new tools, that perhaps those new tools can help us to be able to improve that work-life balance as well.
If I may add, I think we have great tools that we're using in the industry right now, and I think there might be other better tools in other industries of engineering, but at least in the civil engineering industry, we have great tools now that are based on cloud. So different engineers can work on the same project, and everything is updated through the cloud, so everybody can see what the others are doing. And I actually try this myself personally through consulting, because I'm in a different time zone in Israel, and I do my work and people see it when they wake up in the morning in the US. I will be done with my work because my day will be almost over. So the cloud actually helped us really track each other's work and have it updated immediately. So this is one of the advantages also that we have right now, and actually it helps to enhance the project workflow and communication between the team members.
Yeah, and there's another question that sort of goes along with that, of about cybersecurity implications of a growing reliance on connected technology. So are there issues with that, and how do we address that?
Well, I've seen this issue came up, not in actual projects, but actually in research proposals. So it's an issue. Yes, it's an issue that it's a very legitimate question, because this could be an issue. So cybersecurity is a big thing, not only in our industry, but in our daily life, right? So, and infrastructure in particular, this question came up several times, and actually there is a need, to enhance cybersecurity for the data that is collected, from sensors, from everything that is related to the internet. And you were talking about the future also, and there are also other ideas that are proposed for the futures, to be in cars, in vehicles, and to collect data about the transportation system that we are using. So how do we guarantee that this data is accurate and is secure? So here we go back again to the collaboration that we talked about at the beginning, that we need to collaborate with other disciplines. Like, we as civil engineers need to collaborate with other disciplines, in this case computer science, to use cybersecurity in our systems.
Okay, another question from the Q&A here from the audience. Is the industry seeing, this is on the second topic now, so is the industry seeing more companies investing in more environment-friendly materials, or even developing their own? And what's the easiest way to start incorporating environmentally friendly materials into projects?
I can't say I've seen it, but let's take roads. What happened with Katrina in New Orleans? Now we're doing roads that we have porous systems underneath that can store some of that water, so we don't have so much runoff at one time. In New Haven, Connecticut, the city's working hard to create green areas, so if they get a storm, all that water doesn't come off those paved parking lots so fast. They got a place for it to go. They plant trees on it. They ask you to do it in your front yard, things like that. Very small things maybe, but if we think about it and we work on these things when we're doing projects, or we do parking lots that don't have heavy vehicles moving back and forth all the time, we can do these things. We can do these things. We know. We build better roofs. Dave's the seismic guy, but also we build better roofs because of that water. And what do we do with that water when it dumps off the roof? Or how far do we make the overhang of our roofs so we shade our buildings? There's lots of thinking things. Places are doing it. I'm seeing more what we call double layer concrete paving. We use old reused stuff to build that bottom course, but we're paving it right on top, right behind the first spread. Just putting that first course down, and then we're coming along with that second course. There are companies, there are transportation agencies doing these things, experimenting with them, and having pretty good results. And we'll see more and more of it, I believe. It'll get reported. There'll be reports at the Transportation Research Board meeting in January. There'll be reports at other places. There are things that they're not glamorous, but they help.
Well, one of the things that regulations cause us to do that are beneficial, I think, is regulations being based on return events. For instance, a lot of design now needs to be done for a return event that is greater than older designs, and that's in anticipation of sea level changes and a variety of other different conditions that have been studied extensively. And so that has been a conclusion that we need to design for longer return period events. Okay, so that's a regulation that has to be implemented. And then going back to voluntary requirements towards sustainability in both materials and other things. That's not something that we can voluntarily means that somebody's going to choose to do that. And there are a variety of reasons. The top reason, of course, would be economical. That's where we need to make sure that there is sufficient, robust technology, research and development that has that focus of let's try to make this affordable. That's going to be the number one reason why a developer may choose to incorporate sustainable technologies into their systems, into the materials, energy consumption, and all of those things. So there has to be robust, diligent, and again, open to all persons, all opinions, all ideas. Everybody's collaborating and putting together the best ideas we can. With that in mind, is how do we make this economically feasible and economically attractive to developers to be able to implement these things in their construction. A third thing that's related to this is the responsibility of the engineer. Now, I've spent a lot of time reviewing engineering societies' codes of ethics, licensing boards' codes of ethics, and for the most part, whereas they don't require engineers because that's difficult to, I mean, you think of the term require and you think of somebody's policing another person, but they require engineers and they strongly encourage, and again, I understand the meanings of those words. They encourage engineers to be more sustainably minded. And it doesn't mean, hey, you have to sacrifice the economy, the dollar doesn't matter. It's not that at all. It's engineers are empowered with a knowledge and background of the sciences. We're particularly suited to think about these things and to come up with good solutions to address certain problems. And so it's not a matter of the engineer is required to do certain things, but we are empowered by our training and our education to introduce good solutions and to perhaps encourage this robust research and development to be able to make these things, shouldn't use the word make, but to be able to really improve the economic viability of these different sustainable solutions.
We have to do a good job of communicating, and that's why I think the BIM things we can show visual learners. Think about that. Communicate those opportunities that Dave's talking about.
In relation to the material and the companies who are investing more in environmentally friendly materials, they're in the building sector in particular, whether it's in structural material or even in architectural, there have been a lot of efforts, during the last decade plus, I would say, in introducing environmental friendly material. I was involved in, several projects actually that came into the US where we had to go through, materials that, came to the US market where we had to help the companies go through the certification process through the International Code Council evaluation services. So their selling, pitch was, okay, it's a sustainable material. And yes, I mean, for these materials that, we investigated, yes, they had a component that is sustainable, that's used from recycled material. So they did, whatever research is needed, they did whatever, process is needed in the US and sometimes some additional tests in the US to get the certification and then introduce this into the market. And then what's the easiest way to start incorporating this into projects, which is the other part of the question, is basically education. So, seminars, conferences, whether this is presented as a research in project in any conference, or whether it's presented by any company in an exhibit hall in the conference. So these things are very important. And talking about conferences, this is extremely important, for engineers, to attend conferences, to educate themselves about new developments, about new products. Again, whether this is through presentations or through meeting people, in the exhibit hall, presenting products from the different companies. And we have many conferences in our industry that, in every conference, I attend, I see new things or improved things, let's say. Sometimes new, sometimes improved. So yes, there's a lot of effort, from companies. They do R&D to introduce new materials to the market.
And we have time for maybe one last question in the last couple minutes here. So there's one on the last trend.
I like
Sorry.
this last one down here on the chat.
Yep.
Federal regulations, standards for social equity. How's that one?
Yep. That was the one I was going to ask. So the question is, do we need more federal regulations to set standards and requirements for social equity? Cliff, you want to start us off there?
I don't like regulations to start with, but I think we, the industry, have a duty to try to do these things. And I think back to the I-15 coming through Salt Lake City for the Olympics years ago. The contractors actually went out in the communities and talked about what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. And they might have had hot dogs and hamburgers also. They went to the schools and they got the kids to pass out the pamphlets that said, we're going to do this. And people came. And then the superintendents gave out their cards and said, you got a problem? Call me. Here's my card. Call me. We got to step forward and take responsibility for what we're doing. And there were similar things that happened in Boston during the Big Dig. We can do this if we consider ourselves part of the community. I'd like to do it that way, but I'm only one.
I think I think with all things that the government chooses to do to try to change people's behaviors is kind of a combination of canes and carrots. They like to beat people into submission through regulations, but then they also like to introduce some form of enticement to encourage people to behave in a certain way. And I think as society decides how to move forward, I think it's always going to be some combination of canes and carrots, and depending on who's in power politically, you're going to get an imbalance from one side to another. And I think the carrots obviously need to be, as I mentioned before, the primary benefit to a developer or to a person to make a certain decision is generally going to be based on economics. Is it economically feasible or advantageous for a person to make that choice? And I think the carrots can be a great way to introduce a lot of different things. Like, for instance, perhaps engineers that have student loans that they need to pay off, they can pay some of those off by working in an underdeveloped area, working on projects that are specific to underserved communities, and they can have some of their federal loans forgiven as a result of some of the service that they provide over a period of years, or whatever the case happens to be. And I think that's where it really calls out for just everybody's voice. Everybody has a valid opinion. Everybody has a valid, idea to bring to the table. But when we're in an environment where people just get shut down because they have differing opinions, or whatever the case happens to be, they're on the wrong side of the political fence to those who are in power or whatever, and so they get shouted out. That doesn't help anything. And so it's, I think, again, it's always going to be a combination of requirements and enticements, and just finding that balance is always going to be a struggle. And it's, yeah, I tend to be a little bit of a pessimist, and so I'm skeptical that we're going to really see much improvement in the future.
I liked your Job Corps idea, and I've seen it in schools. It really works.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
Mustafa, any last thoughts on that topic?
I think, do we need more? Yes, because we don't have it, but are we going to get that? I don't know. So there are different ways, as Dave mentioned, and I think, if those are done, or some of them are done, or similar things, I think we can achieve that.
We have to listen to people. We have to listen. We tend to wag our own tongues too much and not listen, make sure we understand what they're telling us.
Yep, very, very good reminder. So, okay, this has been a great discussion. We're at time. I know we could definitely keep going about other topics, but thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here today and for a great discussion. Thank you to our audience for attending and for your participation and your great questions. Hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. Again, you'll get a recording. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always reach out to customer success. I'll put our email in the chat if you have questions on the webinar, on AccessEngineering, our sponsor today. So thank you again for attending, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley.
Um,
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.